Okay.
Go for it.
Hello, the internet. Welcome to Open Source Directions, brought to you by OpenTeams, the B2B marketplace for all your support and services for all your favorite open source projects. Open Source Directions brings you all of your favorite news about your favorite projects, favorite open source projects. My name is Henry Badgery, and I'm the growth marketer here at OpenTeams. And joining me as the co-host today is Madikan.
Hi, I'm Madikan. I'm excited to be co-host for this episode of Open Source Directions. I'm a postdoc at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I work on an open source project called the YT Project, and I'm based in Urbana, Illinois.
Awesome. Thank you. And
hello, my name is Ian Stuart. I work for a university here in Scotland, and one of the services that we provide uses Nbgrader. So I'm here to talk to you about Nbgrader, what it is, what it addresses, what it does, and all sorts of things we could do with it in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited for this episode. We're now going to kick it off with a tweet of the week section. Something a little bit new this week, which Ian will be sharing, something that's a bit off the cuff and something to be fun. So Ian, do you want to kick it off?
So we were talking about this before we went on air. Things that we do that are a bit unusual and a bit different. I was a king of summer, and my son killed me. There we are. I was killed on stage in front of, I think it was 8,000 people actually watching at the time. So
what?
Yes.
And what is the King of Summer again? Just for those
Okay. In pagan mythology, which is Celtic mythology, is very important. Scotland, very Celtic organized. This predates Christianity. This predates the concept of a single god figure. A lot of it is anthropomorphized, whatever that word is. So it's what you see out there. You kind of personalize, humanize the things you see, and what you see is the seasons changing. So you see summer growing and getting bountiful and getting full, and then something comes along and kills it. So when you try and tell that tale, what you do is you give these things characters. You give them, almost humanize them. So I was that representation of summer, and the winter part was my friend nicknamed Spike. So Spike was the king of winter, I was the king of summer, and he came along and killed me in front of 8,000 people on a stage in Edinburgh.
So were all 8,000 people co-located there, or were some watching, via a live stream?
No, it's all done on stage. It's actually all done by a huge group of volunteers. You want to find out, you need to look up Beltane, Beltane, Edinburgh.
Okay.
It's one of those things that Lonely Planet says you have to watch.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome.
So you've left us all with a wonderful gem of Beltane, Edinburgh to look up after this podcast.
Go and look it up. It is the most amazing thing you will ever go and watch. And if you're in Edinburgh, particularly students at Edinburgh, very definitely involved. Mm-hmm. It's just fantastic. It is such a welcoming community. Go and watch it. It will blow your socks off.
Okay, I'm super excited. Thank you for sharing. Mine is not nearly as interesting. I was not killed on stage at any point in my life. However, I have I don't have a specific tweet of the week, but I have a new Twitter profile that I found that I would like to share with everybody called Ethics and Bricks. It is somebody who sort of recreates different ethics quotes or ideas with Legos. And so you can kind of go through, there's a Dostoevsky Lego situation or a Nietzsche one. So it's really fun. I think it's really cute. I only knew about Lego grad students. So I thought this was a very fun sort of addition to look at. So enjoy all of the tweets in this profile, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And mine is just a little bit of a plug for OpenTeams, but we're next week going to be releasing a new podcast called Open Source for Business. And basically, we've been interviewing and talking to, we've done seven episodes now, and we talked to some of the biggest names in open source, sort of at the intersection of both open source and business. So we've had Gil Yehuda, Andrew Aitken, Guy Martin, many great names already. And it just is I think, yeah, check it out and stay tuned. Now we're just going to go into introduce the project, Nbgrader. So that is a tool that facilitates creating and grading assignments in Jupyter notebooks. It allows instructors to easily create notebook-based assignments that include both coding exercises and written-free responses. So it has 925 stars on GitHub and about 60,000 downloads based off Conda.
So Ian, can you tell us a little bit about why this project was started and what need it fills?
Absolutely. So Nbgrader, as you said, is a project come out of MIT. Lots of the Jupyter work has come out of MIT. What is it? Why is it there? Well, okay, so the thing I liken it to is homework. As a teacher, you try and impart knowledge to students, but the only way you can check they do it is to give them homework. Mm. And there are many ways of doing it. If you're in the Jupyter notebook environment, then giving them an assignment, a notebook to go and do exercises and then grade it is really good. So that's where it comes from. That's why it's there. And as you say, text, free form, lots of variations in that. Why did they develop it? Essentially, it makes somebody's life easier. You know, if you can automate handing out the assignments, you don't have to email it to them and forget someone. If it's got a system for bringing them back to you, you don't have to wait for them to email back to you. It does all that for you. Grading, it does it for you. It just makes life easier. Lots of things in programming should be about making your life easier. Very firm believer in that.
Couldn't
so
agree
that's
more.
Where it comes from.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I definitely used something. If it wasn't Nbgrader, it was at least something very, very similar when I was doing computer science at university. And it just made it very easy. Again, like a lot of it was automated. There was no need to go back and do everything manually for the teachers, and it just made it a breeze. So I'm also interested in knowing, can you explain a little bit about the history of the name and the logo?
Well, for a start, it has no logo. It's one of these things that like it has no logo, and Nbgrader is NB for notebook and grader for grader. It's what it says on the tin. It didn't do anything fancy when it comes to naming it.
I like it. Very utilitarian. You know. There's also a utilitarian tweet in the in the profile I mentioned earlier. Amazing callback. So perfect. Ian, can you tell us a little bit if there's alternative projects that are in the ecosystem that have to do with grading a notebook type project?
So I'm not aware of anything else in Jupyter land that does this. There are lots of other systems out there that do grading or do moving assignments around. And judging by the number of computer science people at Emory University that go, can you include my favorite thing, please? There's an awful lot of them. But no, none of them exist in the Jupyter environment, and that's where we're working. Our service is a Jupyter hub service, so we want a Jupyter-enabled thing to work. So Nbgrader is what works for us and what we've extended and made, I hope, better.
And so you mentioned that it's built on Jupyter. Is it built on any other technologies?
No. Well, it's got Postgres in it. Is that another technology? So Nbgrader itself is a notebook, classic notebook, not Jupyter Lab, plugin. It's an extension. And the only thing it uses other than JavaScript and Python is it uses an SQL-like database. So it's a bog standard extension. Nothing clever. Well, nothing fancy. Just some very clever people.
I was going to call you out if you said nothing clever, because the Nbgrader is definitely a clever and useful tool.
some very, very clever people got something that's really good for purpose using fairly simple technologies.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about who started it?
So Jessica, I've forgotten Jessica's last name. I apologize to her. And Brian Granger, who's now part of the Jupyter project steering group, were the people who started it back in 2014. So it's been around for a while. 90% of the code is Jessica's code. I mean, it's all out of her head. It's all her baby. She's actually now working in London, interestingly enough. Okay. So yeah, that's where it's come from. It's very definitely come out of MIT's implementation of Jupyter and how they work in their ecosystem.
Okay. And who maintains the project?
Jessica is still the main commit PR manager. My colleague Bert, who would be with us, but he's just become a father, so he's off doing new dad things instead. Oh. Apparently, it's more important than talking to people who knew. So he's another PR manager. So there's a small group of people who manage it, and there's a larger group of enthusiasts who put in data requests and things like that. So
and do you describe yourself as both of those?
No. I leave all of that stuff to Bert.
Okay.
I don't want the responsibility.
Okay, you're here to just walk us through it.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what communities the users and contributors are from? So we've talked a little bit about the maintainers, but
most of the issues that come up in the project are from teachers, lecturers who are trying to install it or make it work. Quite a lot of them are, I'm a beginner and I'm stuck. But we get that in almost every project. We're going to get that. But there's also a small group of people who are still trying to drive on and improve things in it. It's a relatively small group. We're relatively friendly.
You're friendly? No, very friendly.
I have other groups where the usual answer is read the manual. Someone asks when the answer is read the manual. Have you read the manual? That doesn't help. So, yes. But it is people who are teaching. Mm-hmm. It's normally instructors who are involved in this.
And do you see it as like a global community, or is it more,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a global community. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Most of the people who have the time to do it are coming from American institutions, but that's just the nature of the way that institutions around the world work. But yeah, there are people from Europe. There's ourselves. I think there's a guy from Iceland. I can't remember. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of people out there. There's people from the Middle East. I'm not sure if there's any Japanese. Didn't notice any. So yeah, but it's all over. If you're in education and you're using Jupyter, it's a product that you can absolutely use.
It sounds like it's quite a diverse, especially with people all around the world.
Yes.
But is the project participating in any diversity and inclusion efforts?
Okay, I'm going to kind of pick you up on this one. What do you mean by participate in?
Is there any, say, formal programs or attempts to improve the diversity and inclusion within the project?
No. And to a certain extent, I actually find this a bit of a horse that people jump on. In a lot of software, nobody cares what color your skin is. Nobody cares what your lifestyle preference is. Nobody cares what your immediate abilities are. I actually knew a French programmer who was blind. I mean, completely blind. And he was writing programs.
Wow.
Right? So in the Jupyter ecosystem, if you can somehow interact with the system, then you can interact with the project. If you're going to push code requests in, we won't know if you're blind or not blind. We don't care. You can't tell what color somebody's skin in. You can't tell what ethnic background they might or might not have. It's completely irrelevant. So we don't participate in or not participate in. We just want programmers
The best
to
talent.
interact with us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
Okay.
sorry about that little horse. I shall calm down now, shall I?
Well, maybe you could elaborate on some of the maybe community building efforts that your project is doing. So, like, obviously you want programmers, right? And you want to retain them.
Yes.
And so that would be a nice, sometimes D&I efforts exactly align with community building, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so is Nbgrader doing any specific sort of community building or like outreach?
I don't think it's particularly big enough to do that on its own.
Mm-hmm.
It's a relatively small project in that sense. The service that I run, which happens to use Nbgrader, I have a desire to go and make it available to Scottish schools,
Mm-hmm.
particularly Edinburgh schools, because I think that being able to do online teaching, computational notebook teaching, is something that school students will enjoy and will learn from. And this way of doing assignments really works well in that environment. So I think our service wants to engage with schools,
Mm-hmm.
and it's using the Nbgrader project as the hook for doing that. But Nbgrader as a Jupyter project
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really have the resources to go and do anything on its own.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, that's part of like being in a larger ecosystem, right? Like you, in some ways, you have a lot of power because you're in this larger ecosystem, but also you're constrained by some of its stuff. But another thing, like another D&I thing that was brought up at SciPy was translating documentation to different languages, for example, right? Like that's an inclusion thing that maybe could be a barrier to entry for people because the default is assumed to be English generally in a lot of open source programming, right?
Yes. Yeah. And again, if you're going down that line, actually to be properly language, or to have lots of different languages available. So I18N, is it, off the top of my head? Can't remember. You actually now need to have people involved in your project who understand the language to translate it into. Because language translation is not just a case of this word in French is, this word in German is.
Right.
It's semantic meaning, particularly when you're doing documentation for code. Semantic meaning is really important. And so you need people who understand the system to help write that documentation in those languages. So I've got several horses I jump on. I do apologize.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I just want to quickly remind everyone who's listening, feel free to ask any questions for Ian, and we will get back to those at the end of this episode. So now we're actually going to shift into the project demo part of the episode. So we're going to see some cool features of Nbgrader and how it works. So while Ian is getting set up here, we'd like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsor, Quansight, for sponsoring this episode of Open Source Directions. Quansight, creating value from data. So when you're ready, Ian, take it away.
Yep. Okay. I have to say up front that you've only given me about 10 minutes, which is not a lot of time to talk about what is quite a complicated system. So this is really, really cut down on what Nbgrader is. So I hope it's interesting. I hope it covers enough. If there's any questions that get sparked, absolutely ask questions. So the first thing we want to do is just reaffirm what domain, what environment we're talking about. And we are talking about Jupyter notebooks and trying to get stuff from a teacher to a number of students and then back again. So that's the environment we're in. And Nbgrader really comes from an environment, let's put it the right screen, where we're talking about Jupyter Hub as our overarching environment. So the teacher and the students are all in one compute environment. They're all on one machine. So it makes sharing a bit easier. So Nbgrader was written as that kind of intermediate bit. So it takes the document from the teacher, puts into some kind of exchange system. The students can collect it, put it back into the exchange, and go back to the teacher. That's how that flow goes. So Nbgrader had to write something on the teacher side to create assignments, get them out to students, and something on the student side to fetch them, work on them, return them, and then marking. Marking's remarkably difficult, actually. So this is the
automated through Nbgrader.
Say it again.
The marking is it automated through Nbgrader, the marking process?
You can do both, actually.
Okay, cool.
It is assumed that the first time you mark, there'll be automatic grading in there, but then you go in and you manually grade things, and actually you can leave comments as well, because that's something that's really important when you're teaching, is to be able to just say to a student, if you did this slightly differently, it would look nicer or it would work better.
Mm-hmm.
Feedback is really important.
Definitely.
So this is the environment that Nbgrader works in. This is an example of a notebook that a student will receive. So in the top square is a box that they can fill in where they're going to write their function. The second notebook will just give you an output. The third one is the assert Python command. So if the third cell passes with no errors, the student will be awarded points. Okay, so it's nice and simple. This isn't what the instructor writes, though. The instructor has to write a bit more so that the student can get this. So this is what the instructor has when they create it. You'll notice that they've actually got a solution in there. So they can run through the notebook, check everything works. Right? And you can also see that in the third cell, this is where they get 2 points. So as it runs through, if it runs through and the third cell passes with no errors, they are auto-graded for 2 points. That's how that works. This is the instructor's management page, if you want.
So Ian, I don't mean to interrupt, but on the last page,
interrupt.
You had 2 hidden tests.
Yes.
On the second thing that were not shown to the student, right? Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what the hidden tests mean?
It's just one of those things that you might want to have tests. So some of your tests may actually give away how you write the solution. So there will be some tests that you want to run automatically, but not indicate to the student how you solve it. And you can do that by hiding the test.
I see. Okay. So those hidden tests also go into the points allocation.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And it is, unfortunately, because notebooks are relatively simple, if all of the asserts pass, you get the 2 points.
Mm.
If any of them fail, you get no points. Auto grading.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
You can go in manually and divvy up points some other way. Jan's got a question here. Hidden tests may be there to prevent the students from just returning. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Effectively, Jan is saying that in the the def squares bit, you could just hack a thing that returns the 2 options.
Right.
And the 2 hidden tests actually go around that. And so, teacher's management page. This is where we're creating our assignments. As you notice, there's a student version and an instructor version or teacher version. So you create an assignment, and you can have multiple assignments in your course because you're doing multiple bits of homework. You create the instructor version. You then generate the student version, which is the generate column with a little hat. If it's generated, you can then preview the version the student gets. You can release it, which is now when the student can see it to fetch it. At some point, you will want to collect the submissions the student give you, and I'll come to that in a second. If you collect things, then you'll have some number of submissions, which you can then go and look at and mark and whatever, and add feedback to. Having marked everything, you can then generate the feedback files, and you can then release the feedback files or then go to the students. I'm telling you, this is a really high level.
Very intuitive.
This is a very nice walkthrough. Thank you, Ian. This is good. So
the student's life is much easier. Students' lives are always much easier than teachers. So in the top, we've got three tables here. In the top table are the assignments that are available to the student that they haven't yet got. The second one is the assignments they've downloaded. And I haven't shown it on this, but the little arrow at the side of the assignment name, if you click on it, it folds down and shows you the notebooks that you're working on. So you can go to each notebook. You work on them, save them. When you're finished, you can submit them. They then go back up. The teacher can collect them. When they've finished marking them and they've released their assignment, you will then see in the bottom cell, you'll have a thing for collecting feedback and viewing your feedback. And the feedback that comes back to the student looks like this. Again, it takes advantage of Jupyter Notebooks thing of converters. So it takes a notebook and converts it to an HTML file, which is why underneath the cell, we have this comments section. This is the feedback. So the feedback on this essentially is saying that the data list creation, if that was after the test, it might make your code slightly quicker, because then you only create it if you're going to use it rather than every time. Little bits of feedback are useful. You'll also see at the top that it's got all your scores and where you get your points from or not. Right, workflow. Jupyter's workflow is quite complicated, I'm afraid. 11 steps. The first step is the instructor creates the notebook. So that's the one that's got the answers already in it. And in theory, that notebook should run all the way through with no errors. They then generate the student version, release the student version into the Exchange. The student fetches it, works on it, submits it, step 5. The instructor collects it, auto-grades it, manually goes through for partial marks, anything that can't be auto-graded, adding comments, releases the feedback back into the Exchange, step 10, and then step 11 is the student can fetch the feedback.
Awesome.
That's a hugely, hugely high level view on what Nbgrader is. As you can imagine, those steps can be quite complicated underneath.
You've made it so simple, so that was great. And
so,
thank you.
So that's as far as we're going to go, and I want to disappear off and go and drive cars, please.
I love that.
I love this. This is amazing. Okay. I like this interspersal of notebook grading and also car racing.
Yes. Don't spend your time sat in front of a computer. Go outside.
Get out the outdoors. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Maybe people who are listening to this later are outdoors, driving and listening, multitasking, listening to open source directions and doing.
Why do I look like I'm half asleep in there? Anyway, never mind.
Okay, well now. Sorry.
Right. I shall stop boring you with my car.
It wasn't boring at all.
So there you are. Very high level.
Tips.
Any questions? Absolutely. Now is the time to ask them, and I shall try and answer some of them for you.
Yeah, we have a Q&A that will happen right after the roadmap. So if you have any more questions about Notebook please add them to the chat, and we'll make sure to ask them.
We're now going to move on to the roadmap discussion part of the episode. So this is another fun segment of this webinar where we'll talk about Nbgrader, where it's heading and what kind of future directions it's taking. So with that, Ian, can you tell us a little bit more about what directions Nbgrader is heading?
There's a few fairly big issues that need to be looked at and are being looked at. The fact that Nbgrader came from an environment where it was assumed that everything was on one computer is a bit of a problem, because when you have a class of 300 students, you can't all be on one computer. That's a really big computer. So a lot of this stuff has moved into the cloud, and Nbgraders came from a one computer, one file system environment. That doesn't really translate into the cloud. So we've done a fair amount of work in trying to extract the Exchange from this file system base into actually a completely separate element. And your notebook copies the files off to this Exchange and then downloads them from this Exchange, rather than just copying across the file system. So that's actually... that work is in the master branch. It's just not in a release tag yet. So if you do a pip install, you don't get it. But if you do a install from GitHub, you will get it. That's one that we've been working quite a lot. It's also stuck in Jupyter Classic Notebook. It's not available in Jupyter Lab. Jupyter Lab's actually written in, I think, TypeScript and React, I think. Not just straight JavaScript and jQuery, which is what the classic notebook's in. So the plugins don't work. So there is some work to move it across. University California Davis, they had some students who were doing some work on that. Unfortunately, like anything where you have some enthusiastic students doing some work, they then hit the end of their course or semester or whatever period there is and have to go and do other things. and it's sitting there waiting for someone else to come along and work on it. It's the sad situation of lots and lots of open source projects, is that you are reliant on people having time to do these things. So that's where we're with that one. There's another problem in that actually you want to handle multiple courses. So in our environment, we have the authentication actually comes in from the virtual learning environment. And so you have lots of students across lots of courses, and actually the student can be on a different course. So dealing with multiple courses needs to be handled better. I hadn't realized, and actually if I think about it, if I'd thought about it more sensibly, I hadn't realized that quite often tutors actually have multiple markers for homework. What they do is they get one person to mark question 1 for 300 students, and a separate person to mark question 2, and a third person. Right? Nbgrader wasn't set up to do that.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to be looked at, but it requires a ground up redesign, because it starts off on this one instructor, one course, one computer, where it works. There's also nothing in there for deleting assignments. Again, it comes from this one course, one instructor environment, and you throw away the box and build another one for the next course. So you can't delete assignments easily. And that instructor's list of assignments just grows and grows and grows.
Okay.
So we could do with having something in there for deleting. Those are the top level ones. People have been talking about writing Exchange plugins, and so that it goes off and talks to Git in some variety for storage. People are interested in the thing that CoCalc have done. I don't know if you've come across that. CoCalc actually, to make it work, went and rewrote Jupyter Notebook because it was the only way they could do it. Collaborative editing. Actually having two students together working on the same thing at the same time. Not two separate computers in two separate rooms, but sat together, working together, actually help each other learn.
Like a peer programming type thing.
Yes, it's peer programming, but called something softer, I think. So yeah, but you can't do that in Jupyter Notebook because of the way it's written. So that's something that people would like to see in here. And various things like that could do with coming. Some of them are more Jupyter centric than Nbgrader, but yeah, being able to have multiple markers, being able to have multiple courses, being able to work in Jupyter Lab, they're all fairly big ones that are either being worked on or need to be picked up again. And no doubt we'll end up picking up the lab one, for example. Will come back to haunt us as something we want to do, because it fits into our service.
So if somebody wanted to start contributing to, Nbgrader, maybe wants to get more involved at the development level in the community, like what things do need to get picked back up? What specific things?
You need a computer. You need to do git fork, start programming.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Right, but which projects are open? Which one needs somebody to be which one of the PRs isn't being actively, or like concepts isn't being actively worked on?
If you go to the repo, you'll see which ones are there, and just ask us. Just go, I'm interested in this. There's a guy's actually, it's been sitting in the back of his head for a while. He's just pushed up a PR for adding a lot more technical documentation. There's lots of fairly good documentation kind of mid-level, but nothing really techy on how it works underneath.
Okay, like for developers, for example.
Yeah.
Oh,
so he's written that. Lots of I'm actually come from a Perl world. I learnt my programming in Perl land, and Python programmers seem to think that documentation is called code. You go and read the code to work out how it works, and I think there should be more documentation. So I'm quite glad to see this. I think this is really useful. I'm a big fan of documentation.
And documentation is such a nice way to get involved in the community, because you can learn a lot from the code itself, and then somebody reviewing your documentation, you can really find out very quickly if you've misunderstood something about the code, right? So yes, that's always a wonderful way to get involved in the community.
But there's actually a thing where if you can write it down, you have it in your head properly.
Yes.
Try to explain to someone else too is just means you understand it.
We all think we understand something, but if you actually try and explain it to someone, you can't.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like one of the
write it down. It's a really good way to know you understand something, to write it down.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, we've just got a question from Jan Kim. Are there any facilities to automatically grade course organization? Example, if you require that students write classes, can Nbgrader check that solutions are structured accordingly?
So I kind of want to ask what he means by that. So are you asking about whether the I'm going to go with Python because Jupyter is essentially a Python environment. Are you talking about that they're writing the code structurally correct? Are you talking about, are they? So if I go back to my example a minute, bear with us for a minute while we flick around screens and I share with you. I like questions like this. This is really good.
And also clarified, said, sorry, I mean code organization.
Yes. Yeah. Let me drop down to this example here. Okay. So in our top square where we're defining the square.
We can't see your screen right now.
I haven't got a screen. Look, I'm too far ahead of you. There we are. That one.
We're just keeping you on your toes. We're just keeping you on your toes, Ian.
That's good. Okay. So essentially what Nbgrader is doing is it's at its low level, it is running cell 3 on the screen. And if it's true, it gives you 2 points. What you can do is you'll see that cell 1 is an auto-graded answer. So you will see that, the instructor will see that and will be able to manually give you an idea of how well it is formatted. But unless you can think of a way of programmatically testing that is well formatted, you won't be able to automatically grade it. Does that make sense? You can say no.
So it seems like, yeah, if an instructor wanted to teach, for example, I think Jan mentioned classes or something, right? You could see that a student creates certain methods within the class and that each method exists, right?
Yes.
And that method operates, and you could also look for certain class attributes.
Absolutely.
And make sure that they exist. So you could programmatically like check certain parts of the class, but maybe it would be more challenging to do something even higher level than that, right? If you wanted somebody to write a package or like a student to write a package, that like a notebook is not necessarily maybe the best place to be writing a package. And so that would become more challenging, right?
Yeah, so that's a really good example, actually. It's much better than anything I was thinking of. So absolutely, if you want someone to write an object class, you can then test to see the object attributes on that class and whether the functions are working. So at that point, you can absolutely test that it is working, in which case you can auto-grade it. But if you're looking at code flow, if it's that kind of human-centric thing, that's a human judgment call and therefore manually graded. I don't know if that helps, Jan.
I think that was helpful, definitely.
Right.
Awesome. All right. Well, now it's time for our world famous rant and rave section. We all get 15 seconds to rant or rave about whatever topic we want. So Ian, it's your soapbox first.
Only 15. What? You don't give me any time for these things. Okay, my rant.
Yeah, longer than 15 seconds.
I started off I've been programming for far too many years. I started off in the days of the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Nice and simple. For this service we're running, for the notable service we're running, I have, and I counted it this morning, I have 33 different languages and technologies that I have to juggle and be aware of and be able to use to keep my service running. 33. Just like, and we're talking Puppet to manage VMs all the way up to W3C accessibility and ARIA attributes on your HTML. I mean, the whole spectrum you would now have to know. Mm-hmm. So yes, my rant is, why has the world got so complicated?
A very existential question, Ian.
Can we go back to simple? I'm just a simple man. I want simple.
Medekin, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I have a rant today, and it is about cording, specifically like pretty fine cording, like maybe for your headphones or your computer charger. Why do they always split? It happens like within a year of buying it, and then it starts fraying at some random point that gets like a lot of stress. Usually it's like near where it's turned or something. I'm annoyed. I don't want to have to rebuy these. I spent a bunch of money on this product. Design better cords. I'm tired of this. So
everyone listening, someone needs to do it. Pick it up.
Yeah. Feel my rage, okay? Feel it through the screen. Feel it through whatever speakers you're listening to.
I know where you're coming from. I absolutely know where you're coming from.
See, Ian feels my rage. You should feel my rage.
It's a cable across the headband that always goes for me.
Yes, yes.
A cable across the headband always goes.
I don't want AirPods. I want cups over my ears. I want to drown out the lawnmowers. I need a good cord.
Oh, I'll tell you one for that. I have hearing aids. You try and find headphones that go over the full ear. I spend my life with my hearing aids crushed between my ear and my skull.
Oh no!
Because headphones clamp.
We need huge cups. We need giant cups.
Cans.
Yes. Okay, so extra rant, headphone cups. We parlayed into another
cables that don't break every 30 seconds. I feel your pain.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is just a little bit of I guess it's called a rant, and it's just we've got 1 month left of summer now, and to me it's the most uneventful summer that I've ever had in my life. I don't know about everyone else, so it's kind of just a bit sad. Summer's usually my favorite month, but you can't really do much with everything going on now. But yeah, that's all we have time for today. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in and listening. You can find us on Twitter at OpenTeams Inc. and at QuantSiteAI. Ian, where can people find you and Nbgrader?
So Nbgrader is on GitHub. Mentioned that before. For me and our organization, I work for an organization called Edina, EDINA. We're at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I was going to say we're in Edinburgh, but actually we're all working at home at the moment, so I'm not in Edinburgh. I'm in my house with a nice shed and my car's attached. I'm a much happier place.
Nice.
And here's our call to action to all open source contributors. Sign up to OpenTeams today to build your online profile. Also, if you've been listening to this on YouTube, please leave a review or a comment and like the video. Let us know what you think. Please come and join us next episode where we will have our pie and eat it too with SimPie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ian.
Bye. Go